Ryan Carter pushed open the wrong door in a rush. The hospital room was cold and silent. A woman lay pale against white sheets, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. No flowers on the nightstand. No cards. No one waiting in the chair by the window. He stood there holding sunflowers meant for someone else. Without thinking, he set them down and left. He didn't know that small mistake would pull him into a life he never planned. That the wrong room would become the right choice. That dying alone could still mean learning to live. Ryan Carter wasn't the kind of man who wandered into places by accident. He kept his life narrow and controlled. Work. His daughter. Nothing else. The hospital visit that afternoon was already pushing the limits of what he allowed himself. An old college friend had been admitted for surgery, and Ryan had promised to stop by. He didn't like hospitals. The smell alone brought back memories he'd buried 3 years ago. He parked in the visitor lot and walked through the automatic doors with a bouquet of sunflowers he'd picked up at the grocery store. The flowers felt ridiculous in his hands, too bright against the gray hallways. He checked the room number his friend had texted him. 3rd floor. Room 314. He took the elevator up and stepped out into a corridor that smelled like disinfectant and something vaguely sweet he couldn't place. The hallway stretched out in both directions, identical doors on either side. He turned left, counted the numbers. 310. 312. He stopped at the next door, nudged it open with his shoulder, and stepped inside. The woman on the bed didn't move. Her eyes were closed, her face so pale it nearly matched the pillowcase. Dark hair spread around her head like she'd been arranged that way. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of a monitor beside her. Ryan stood there, confused, his brain catching up slower than it should have. This wasn't his friend. This wasn't even a man. He glanced at the door. No nameplate, no chart hanging outside. He turned back to the woman and noticed the rest of the room. Empty. Not just empty. Abandoned. No flowers. No cards propped on the nightstand. No jacket draped over the chair. No one had been here. Maybe no one was coming. Ryan didn't know why he stayed. He should have backed out, found the right room, laughed it off later. Instead, he looked down at the sunflowers in his hand. They were too cheerful for wherever he was supposed to be anyway. He set them on the small table beside her bed, quiet as he could, and left without a sound. He found his friend 2 doors down. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, and Ryan left the hospital thinking he'd forget the whole thing by morning. He didn't. 3 days later, Ryan was back at the hospital. Not for his friend this time. He told himself he was just curious. He wanted to know if the flowers were still there, or if someone had finally shown up. He didn't plan to go inside. He walked past the room once, glanced through the small window in the door. The sunflowers were still on the table, wilting now. The woman was awake, staring at the ceiling. Ryan kept walking. He made it to the elevator before he stopped. He stood there, hand on the button, and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't pity. Pity was easy to ignore. This was something else, something that reminded him of sitting alone in his kitchen 3 years ago, after the funeral, when his daughter had finally fallen asleep and the house had gone silent. He'd wished, just once, that someone had left him flowers. He turned around. This time he didn't go in. He found a nurse at the station and asked about the woman in room 314. The nurse looked up from her computer, hesitant at first, but Ryan's face must have convinced her he wasn't a threat. "Lily Anderson," the nurse said. Her voice was soft, like she was used to delivering bad news. "She's been here 2 weeks. Stage 3 lymphoma. She's responding to treatment, but it's slow." Ryan nodded. He didn't ask the question he really wanted to ask. The nurse answered it anyway. "No visitors," she said. "Not one." Ryan left the hospital and sat in his car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. He didn't understand what he was doing. He had a daughter to take care of, a job that barely paid enough. He didn't have space in his life for someone else's tragedy. But that night, After he put his daughter to bed, he sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Small things. Things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but might mean something to someone alone. The next day, he brought a book, a paperback he'd read twice and liked enough to pass on. He didn't go into the room. He left it with the nurse and asked her to put it on the table. The day after that, he brought a small potted plant, something that wouldn't die as fast as flowers. Then a blanket, soft and gray. Then a card with a landscape on the front and nothing written inside. He never stayed. He never introduced himself. He didn't want credit. He just wanted her to know that someone was thinking about her, that she wasn't as alone as that room made her feel. 2 weeks passed. Ryan kept coming. He started to recognize the nurses, and they started to recognize him. One of them, an older woman named Dorothy, smiled every time she saw him. She never asked why. She just took whatever he brought and promised to leave it where Lily would see it. Ryan didn't know if Lily noticed. He didn't know if she cared. He told himself it didn't matter. But every time he walked away from that hospital, he felt a little less hollow. Then one afternoon, Dorothy stopped him before he could leave. She had a strange look on her face. Not worried, exactly. More like she was holding back a secret. "She's asking about you," Dorothy said. Ryan frowned. "What do you mean?" "She wants to know who's been leaving things for her." Ryan felt his stomach tighten. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He hadn't planned for this to become real. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Dorothy shrugged. "I told her I didn't know your name, but she's getting better, you know. She's sitting up now, talking more. She might be discharged in a few weeks." Ryan nodded slowly. He didn't know what to do with that information. Part of him wanted to disappear before it got complicated. The other part, the part he didn't like to admit existed, wanted to meet her, to see if the person matched the quiet image he'd built in his head. He didn't decide right away. He left the hospital and drove home, picked up his daughter from school, made dinner, helped with homework. Normal life. Safe life. But that night, lying in bed, he kept thinking about what Dorothy had said. She's getting better. He'd started this because she was alone, because no one should go through something like that without knowing someone cared. But now she was asking questions. Now she wanted to know. The next day, Ryan brought a small journal, something she could write in if she wanted. He handed it to Dorothy like always, but before he could leave, she shook her head. "You should give it to her yourself," Dorothy said. Ryan stared at her. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" He didn't have an answer, at least not one that made sense out loud. "Because I'm afraid, because I don't know how to explain this, because I have a daughter and a life that doesn't have room for this kind of risk." Dorothy just smiled. "Room 314. She's awake." Ryan stood there, holding the journal, feeling like he'd been cornered. He walked down the hallway slowly, stopped outside her door, and looked through the window. Lily was sitting up in bed, reading the book he'd left 2 weeks ago. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked stronger than the first time he'd seen her. Still pale, still thin, but alive. He knocked softly. She looked up. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then she smiled, just a small one. But it was enough. Ryan opened the door and stepped inside. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Hi," Lily said. She set the book down on her lap. "You're the one who's been leaving things." It wasn't a question, but Ryan nodded anyway. "I wasn't sure you were real," she said. "I thought maybe the nurses were just being nice." "They are nice," Ryan said. "But no, it was me." Lily looked at him for a long moment. Not suspicious, just curious. Like she was trying to figure out why a stranger would do something like this. "Why?" she asked. Ryan didn't have a good answer. He thought about lying, making up something simple. But standing there, looking at her, he realized she deserved the truth, or at least the closest thing to it he could manage. "I walked into the wrong room," he said, "and you were alone. And I guess I just thought no one should be that alone." Lily's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. She nodded once, like she understood more than he'd said. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ryan held out the journal. "I brought this, in case you wanted to write, or draw, or just have something to do." She took it from him, ran her fingers over the cover. "I used to write," she said, "before all this." "Maybe you still can," Ryan said. Lily looked up at him again, and this time she smiled a little wider. "Maybe." Ryan didn't know what else to say. He felt like he'd crossed a line he couldn't step back over. This wasn't anonymous anymore. This was real. And real meant complicated. "I should go," he said. "Will you come back?" Lily asked. Ryan hesitated. He thought about his daughter, about the carefully controlled life he'd built to protect them both, about how easy it would be to say no and walk away clean. "Yeah," he said. "I'll come back." And he did. Ryan came back the next afternoon. He told himself it was just to check in, to make sure she was doing okay. But when he walked into her room and saw her sitting up with the journal open on her lap, he realized he'd been looking forward to it. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. Lily looked up and smiled. It was a small smile, careful, like she wasn't sure how much energy to spend on it. But it was real. "You came back," she said. "I said I would," Ryan replied. He stood near the door, unsure whether to sit or stay standing. The chair by her bed felt too close, too personal. "You can sit," Lily said, like she'd read his mind. "I don't bite." Ryan sat down. The room felt smaller with both of them in it. He could hear the faint hum of the machines, the air conditioning cycling on. Lily closed the journal and set it aside. "I started writing again," she said. "Just a little. I forgot how much I missed it." "What do you write about?" Ryan asked. Lily looked out the window. "Things I notice, small things, like the way the light hits the wall in the morning, or the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Things that remind me I'm still here." Ryan nodded. He understood that more than she knew. After his wife died, he'd done the same thing. Not writing, but noticing. Counting the small details of the day just to prove time was still moving. They talked for 20 minutes. Nothing heavy. She asked what he did for work, and he told her he managed inventory at a warehouse. She asked if he liked it, and he said it paid the bills. She didn't ask about his personal life, and he was grateful for that. He wasn't ready to talk about his daughter yet, or about why he was alone. When he left that day, he felt lighter, but also more tangled. He'd started this to help someone. Now he didn't know what it was becoming. Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan visited 4 more times. Each visit felt easier. Lily was getting stronger. Her color was coming back. She could sit up longer without getting tired. The nurses said her latest scans looked promising. The treatment was working. She might be discharged by the end of the month. Ryan should have been happy for her. He was. But there was something else underneath, a quiet dread that once she left, this thing they were building would disappear. He didn't know how to hold on to something that had no structure. One afternoon, Lily asked him the question he'd been avoiding. "Why don't you ever talk about yourself?" she said. Ryan looked at her. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed now, stronger than she'd been in weeks. Her eyes were sharp, direct. "I talk about myself," Ryan said. "No," Lily said. "You talk about work, about the weather, about the cafeteria coffee. But you don't talk about you." Ryan shifted in his chair. "There's not much to say. I don't believe that." He looked down at his hands. He'd worked hard to keep this part of his life separate, to not let it bleed into the fragile thing they were building. But Lily wasn't going to let him hide. "I have a daughter," Ryan said finally. "Her name's Emma. She's 8. Lily's expression softened. "You're a dad." "Yeah." Where's her mom? Ryan felt the familiar tightness in his chest. She died. 3 years ago. Cancer. The room went quiet. Lily didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer empty comfort. She just looked at him like she understood. Like she knew what it meant to lose something you couldn't get back. That's why you were here, Lily said quietly.